Hey everyone, welcome back. Now, this is another Saren video, but I'm gonna make this one short and sweet. I just want you all to know this one wasn't my idea. Dystopia tossed this one quickly my way and asked me if I was interested in covering it. It is somewhat of a meme, and I don't really find much use out of it except against Corpus Steel Pass, but much worse than the Tenet Flux setup I just showed you yesterday, and I guess normal Star Chart Fissure running, where I find this is actually best suited. This is basically just a massive tile-wide Toxin Lash infused infinite ammo cannon. Its purpose? I guess you could use this if you're tired of the Titania Thermal Sunder meta. It's not really any better than it, and many times it could actually be worse. But, well, 33 meter AoE, and Dystopia asked if I was interested, so might as well take a look, right? Disclaimer, I'm not saying this is a new meta build. It's in a weird spot between meme-ish and actually being meta. It works better than it should, I think, but it's not exactly quite there. The damage issues eventually start becoming apparent even in just around the level 60 to 70 range against normal Grineer, but let's take a closer look. This is the Codex entry for Shido. At first glance, it has decent crit stats and status, but where it actually falls short is the 7 magazine. This was the very first arm cannon we got in the game, and I guess DE was being conservative at first. The weapon is serviceable, but Shido has really fallen by the wayside after the Bubonico was released. It basically surpassed it in all stats, with better crit, status, magazine, fire rate, and base elements. Basically everything about Bubonico is better than Shido, but that's not what this video is about today. Ironically, the whole reason we are using Shido today is for something that's not listed in the codex. Most people use Shido and try to get busted damage out of the innate element scaling and CC with above average DPS, or an infinite ammo setup where the fire rate just barely matches the regeneration rate of the ammo so that you never need to wait for it to regenerate. We don't care about any of that today. So, when you dump the entire mag of Shido, there is a shockwave that's launched in a radius around you. It has a forced impact proc, but very low damage. Its main gimmick is auto-stripping all sentient damage resistance with this pulse, which has a pretty crazy base 20 meter radius. It's a crap DPS option, but you should know by now what happens when we find a crappy AoE damage option on a weapon. Saren's Toxin Lash will enable us to buff the crap out of this AoE and provide Toxin Dots for scaling damage. The only problem is the horrible base damage on the AoE and the limitation of needing to dump the entire magazine to trigger it. But it has a 20 meter AoE, so it can't be complete trash, right? Well, let's look at the build. This is another weird one, just like the Tenet Flux rifle. If you're looking for a Steel Path nuke with a single target weapon to AoE, the Tenet Flux rifle does that much better, but only against Corpus. You can check that video out at the top right card from yesterday. Actually, okay, first thing, make sure your energy colors are set to black, else you're gonna blind yourself using this weapon. Anyways, first thing to know is there aren't that many ways to improve the base damage on the AoE. I'm running Primed Cryo and Malignant to get base viral. It's really only being used to buff your AoE damage if something lives it. But this isn't super important. We have double fire rate because, well, elementals don't really help the AoE damage. It can't crit or proc status normally, so this means we have spare slots. More fire rate means we reach the next AoE pulse faster. That's about it. You'll notice I actually slapped both Malignant and Infected Clip, and that's because we're using it to scale into Toxin Lash, which includes modded Toxin. Primed Firestorm improves this impressive base 20 meters radius to 33.6. This isn't even listed in the arsenal, but yes, 33.6 fucking meters. This is why the strat is even usable, because honestly the damage is somewhat lacking. The Prime Bane is pretty self-explanatory because it triple dips once again. Once for the AoE, once for the Toxin Lash scaling, and once again for the Toxin Dot. Honestly, if you aren't sure or don't want to run Banes, I would say either replace the Bane with Heavy Caliber, or drop Speed Trigger for a second Prime Bane to cover both Corpus and Corrupted. I wouldn't recommend using this against Grineer, but if you're adamant about it, you will absolutely need a primed Bane Grineer equipped. Typically, I just wouldn't even use this against Grineer to start out with beyond level 50. Remember, the AoE normally can't crit, so damage really suffers. It gets a tiny buff from the Vigilante set, which is why we're slotting Vigilante supplies in the Exilus. Primary Merciless does factor into the base damage calculation for the AoE and Toxin Lash scaling, and the reload also helps to get the pulses out faster. The Saren looks like this. It's a Combat Discipline Arcane Avenger setup, because this is one of the very few ways to make the AoE pulse crit. This is important because it is the only way to proc Arcane Acceleration besides direct hits with the main shot, which you probably won't be getting if it's a 33.6 AoE pulse, because it only activates on critical hits. The self-damage triggered by Combat Discipline activates Arcane Avenger, which lets you kill more easily with the AoE and trigger Arcane Acceleration. And then it just funnels into itself again to sustain Avenger further. Keep in mind, this is a Fissure Siren setup, so missions will reset often, and we want to be able to cast abilities right off the bat. That's why I have Flow and Preparation slotted. Natural Talent also, because you don't want to fall behind right at the start. The rest of the mods are all geared towards duration and strength in hopes you don't have to cast them again, or at most just once after you've buffed at the start. Prime Sure-Footed is kind of important here. You can shoot your Shido shots wherever, and you aren't going to die in Fissure difficulty missions. But if you shoot your Shido anywhere remotely close to you, it will stagger or even knock you down. So pretty important to have this on the build. But you can technically just run Cautious Shot, I guess, over Speed Trigger if you don't have Prime Sure-Footed, so long as you don't literally shoot at your feet and knock yourself. If you can fit it, I would recommend running Umbrella Intensify instead of Augur's Secrets. Nothing else on this build really matters. I guess you can pick out your companion? Damage isn't really a huge issue, and the scaling of Panzer isn't that consistent to 33.6 meters, so I don't really need it, but you could run that if you want. Otherwise, I'm probably just going to bring my Smita Kavat in hopes the charm buff triggers for double void traces. It really doesn't matter what you bring, just make sure it has vacuum or fetch because you really don't want to walk around picking up reactant manually. Now let's hop right into some fissures and see how it plays out. Note that this suit exterminates best by a long shot because the entire purpose of this build is to actually kill shit. You cast your 1, your 3, and Roar, like always, nothing special. I mean, I guess you could skip Roar if it's normal star chart enemies for Corpus or Corrupted, but it is really needed for Grineer if they're above, like, say level 30, because the base damage of the AoE is just that bad. From here on out, you just path towards Extract and hold down mouse 1. That's it. A worse Titania Thermal Sunder, I guess? It's just a fun gimmick, but nothing really special. Honestly, this video is just a filler while I'm busy working on an up-to-date Plague Star guide for tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or better yet subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. 79.5% of you are not subscribed. I'm trying my best to get you new information out always as soon as possible, like I've done with covering Tempest Story and the Sisters of Parvos updates. Stick around if you want to see interesting memes and builds on a nearly daily basis. I'm also preparing to get you info first out once new war info drops. You don't want to miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching and see you all next time.